Hello everyone, and welcome to the 5th episode of this series where I discuss Wim Wenders and his double beat theory. This episode will be a little bit different. In previous episode I've, so to say, debunked Wim Wenders' theory by using historical sources. In this video I'll do something far less scientific. I will discuss artistic freedom. Because while I think Wim's arguments are quite dishonest, as I've showed in the previous videos, his strawman against artistic freedom is one of the ones I find most annoying. This strawman argument got him in a heated discussion with Pollini and Lisitsa after he used her in yet another of his videos. What he does is that he finds a part in the piece where the performer is slowing down for whatever reason. He then says they do this because of technical difficulty, and that this once and for all proves that double beat theory is the only reasonable theory, as not even Pollini and Lisitsa can play it in tempo. Lisitsa is far from the only musician that has suffered from this attack of Wim Wenders. Other musicians have also been, for example, Pollini, Ashkenazy, I think he used Schabel in one of his videos as well. But since Lisitsa is the latest one, I will use this as an example.
At the beginning, where my tempo was half as slow or fast as her tempo. Now, in this passage where Beethoven increases the tempo, and for a reason. I mean, in Lisitsa's tempo, one would have to play way above 20 notes a second, even though it's arpeggios, and arpeggios you can play faster than just scales or even other more difficult patterns on the piano. But even, 23, 24 notes a second, that's the speed that she and others should be playing here in this passage, where Beethoven is increasing the tension of this piece by going from 16th notes suddenly to 32nd notes, building the climax. And what all pianists are doing is taking back tempo and actually slowing down until my whole beat tempo. And this is something that you have to think about, because Beethoven does not indicate any kind of ritardando. The 32nd notes here are not structural note values that determine the tempo of the whole piece, and if they did, you should take them into account. At the maximum, you could say that the tempo that Czerny gave in my interpretation of whole beat is kind of calculated or based upon this passage, where I also am playing like 30 notes a second. That's the maximum you can do, I think, or what Czerny was thinking that you can do. So he might have been calculating his tempo on these 30-second notes, but he takes that tempo for the entire piece. There is no indication in this score, if we all have to follow the score, where Beethoven gives you the possibility of taking a different tempo at the beginning and throughout the piece, and then slowing down in these bars, like falling back on a tempo that's half as fast. So here you come to the question. If you ask the question, who's right and who's wrong? There is no other option for me to say that my interpretation of the text was right and that of Lisitsa's and others is simply wrong. Then we have to assume that Beethoven made a mistake, another one. And I'm not willing to go there unless I really don't see another solution. And there is another solution, we all know that. That's just as metronome numbers, they are not being read in those days as today. So only apply.
Not only is this quite ugly, honestly, he sort of assumes that the musician isn't thinking about the music, but just, oh, I can do this technically, therefore I'll do it like this. But not that their decisions might have to do with the music they're playing. It's also about how the performer reads the score. And he should know that there are different ways of doing so, even though he might not necessarily agree with it. There are of course two extremes, so to say, in reading the score. On one side, nothing is written, and on the other side, everything is written. If one narrows this down a little bit, one gets to the sort of, either the score is a map where you can see what's around you, but you shouldn't go there because the map doesn't tell you to. or the score is more of a guide, that you yourself decide what you want to see in it. There are of course great musicians on both sides of the spectrum. Glenn Gould, for example, is quite clearly one that thinks that the score is a guide. Another one is Andras Schiff, that of course thinks that everything is written in the score. You might have your preferences, but you can't argue that the other side doesn't exist. The problem occurs when Wim takes this freedom away from his opponent just to prove a point. One doesn't have to agree with the other side, but you have to recognize that it exists. Because on a serious note, you can't think that Valentina Lisitsa can't play those broken chords. She obviously can, but chooses not to. First, notice how long Valentina Lisitsa stays on the keys after she played them. If she was in a hurry, she clearly wouldn't do that, but move on to the next one as soon as she could. Second, notice how incredibly long this fermata is. If she would have played the arpeggios in tempo, this long fermata would make absolutely no sense musically. And lastly, you don't have to agree with her decision, but there is clearly a sort of cadenza or recitative feeling about this passage. And Lisitsa clearly feels that this is better brought out if she broadens the tempo. So let's do the same with Wim. Let's find a part in his playing and vividly argue that he does this from a technical perspective rather than a musical one, and then see where that gets us. Let's take legato, for example. I know Wim can play legato, just as Lisitsa can play fast, but here he doesn't. The composer clearly indicated legato, yet Wim chooses to play staccato. And here he does it again in Opus 10 number 4. If I would have made these accusations in a serious way, you would be completely right to point out how silly they were. But that has to work for Wim Wenders as well. You can't just take away a performer's artistic freedom to prove your point. That doesn't make it a theory, and it's very ugly. Because at least with these misrepresented sources that Wim is using, there is a sort of attempt to make it scientific. But these accusations that he's doing are just completely anti-musical. And for someone who's trying to prove a point about what he thinks is a serious theory, is very, very low. I will make my own series about this too, about the different ways to read a score and how these different ways can inform one's playing or to change the piece. That's all for this episode, and if you have suggestions about future episodes, please don't hesitate to write so in the comments. So thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day.